You're listening to the Hire Calling Podcast, your source for all things hiring, staffing, and recruiting. I'm Pete Newsome, joined by Ricky Baez today. Ricky, how are you?
I'm doing good, Pete. How about yourself?
I'm doing well, Ricky. At some point, I just have to say it's Pete and Ricky and then just be done with it. The introduction,
That's it.
it's the same thing every time.
I mean, it's not like we didn't ask how we're doing before we started recording, right? We just want everybody else to know that we're cordial with each other.
That's true. If you stop and think about it, there's absolutely no reason for me to ask how you're doing.
There isn't.
We've already established that prior to hitting the record button. But nonetheless, here we are.
That's right.
Back for another recording to talk today about speeding up the hiring process. That's an important thing.
Why would we want to speed that up, Pete?
Lots of reasons. One thing I'll tell you is candidates certainly will appreciate it. We know that because, boy, you don't have to spend more than a couple of minutes on LinkedIn to see a whole lot of frustrated candidates out there these days who are trying to find a great job, and it just doesn't seem to be happening quickly for them.
Well, I mean, it doesn't, right? And then there's a lot of recruiters that have a lot of their mind and a lot of things that they're juggling. That's not an excuse, but you're right. You've got candidates out there who are out there waiting, and while they're waiting, other things can happen, which that's what we're going to dive into today, right? The importance of speeding up the hiring process. That way you don't lose out on great top candidates.
So let's just start with talking. What are we talking about really? The time to hire. It's the time between when you make a decision that a job needs to be filled, you have an opening that's new, a replacement for someone, you post that job. How quickly can you get someone in the seat? How long does it take? Let's talk about the average. And the average has been going up. What do you think? You know what the average is. If you're listening to us right now, stop and think, how long do you think it takes for a company to fill an open position? We'll wait. And then we'll answer.
Well, I'm going to go without looking at any stats. I'm going to go with when I was leading a team of recruiters and the KPIs I had for them. And what I told them that on average, 30 days, beginning to end, from opening to executing a job offer and accepting that job offer, beginning to end, 4 weeks, 30 days.
Now, we know there's a difference between corporate, how a corporation would measure that with their internal team, and how a staffing company, a third party, would measure that. 30
very
days
different.
can be a long time for some jobs. Yeah. The average, according to the Society for Human Resource Management, is actually 36 days. But recent studies have shown 44 or maybe even 50 days. Now, we think that's changing for a number of reasons. Why do you think it's evolving and going higher?
Well, I think wow, so 36 days, so 5 weeks. So I think it's going higher just because the lower the unemployment rate, as it keeps trending lower, the less able bodies that are out in the workforce looking for work, and the less talent that recruiters have to work with, the higher the time to fill on average would come to be, because the less people that are out there, the more work the recruiter has to do to fill those positions. So I'm thinking it's unemployment.
You think so? I think it's more about companies right now being hesitant and very cautious in making any decisions. So even though the hiring need is there, they're not pulling the trigger as quickly. And that is something that a lot of staffing companies are experiencing right now. We talk, we share information, and it's very common. Companies are slower to pull the trigger. Now you're smiling big at that. Why so?
I'm smiling big because, Pete, on this show for the past couple of years, we've talked about how organizations go on this humongous hiring blitz only 6 months later to figure out they've overshot their goals, and now they have to lay people off. So I'm smiling because I'm like, did organizations learn their lesson? Are they now being more cautious instead of following somebody's trail that they blazed to hire people left and right? What happened?
I think a lot of it's reactive, to your point. We saw that happening a couple of years ago, post-COVID, and the hiring craze that was happening, where companies were paying giant salaries, bigger than they needed to. Now, being in the recruiting space, we saw that very prevalent in our industry, where recruiters with very little experience were getting offered the opportunity to work remotely, giant salaries, Amazon, Facebook at the time, Meta, if we're going to call them that now, I guess. They were throwing huge salaries out there, and it flooded the market with new opportunities, and a lot of people jump ship. And now the pendulum has swung back. This happens. The need is no longer as great as it was. And so companies are reacting differently now. And I think the economic uncertainty that we're facing continues to be an issue where companies just continue to sit on the sidelines with a lot of things and watch and wait to see what's going to happen. And hiring is part of that. That's my perspective on it.
So for the sake of everybody listening, because you and I both know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask anyway, that way they can be a part of the conversation. Why should we care if we fill a position quickly? Shouldn't recruiters and organizations take the time to make sure they got the right candidate?
They should, but they have to balance that against the negatives of waiting, right? A prolonged hiring process leads to other problems. So let's just talk about those.
Okay.
One is there's a cost associated with a vacancy. We call it cost of vacancy. You have to know what that is.
Yep.
What happens to your organization as long as that position remains unfilled? And we have a recent blog post on fourcornerresources.com about it. I encourage everyone to check it out because it actually lists the calculation. I'm not going to try to describe that verbally. It's math. Verbal math is no fun. But there is a true cost to not filling a position. And there's losses that happen. Maybe it's customer service declines. Maybe it's a loss of productivity of sales. Not to mention the true burnout that happens from your other employees who have to share the load. So those are the hidden costs, if you will. Even though they're real numbers, companies don't stop and consider those things when some do. I think most don't. What's your take on that?
Most do not. And I actually got a quick story on that, Pete, because when I was in corporate America and I was working for Sears Home Improvement, we were trying to figure out, look, we're not offering enough. We are not offering enough to make sure that we fill the positions that we set out to fill. And back then, I think I had to fill 500 in one calendar year. And that was at a time when unemployment was really, really low at that time. So the best way to convince senior leadership, right, is to translate that problem into numbers, right? So instead of saying, hey, we're not filling positions, and they're like, well, we're doing the job with the people you have to convert those vacancies into lots of productivity. So long story short, we were able to figure out for every empty seat per hour will cost the organization $1,000 per hour for every empty seat. So once they were able to see that, like, whoa, we're losing how much? Okay, here's a check. Whatever you need, here you go. Right. So you have to articulate that. Now, as a recruiter, a recruiting manager, after you're done articulating that and they give you those funds, you better perform. You better perform, right? You better put your theory to the test. So yeah, it's the best way to get executive leadership's attention is to focus on the loss of productivity and how much that vacancy is costing them.
Perfect. So pitfalls of a prolonged hiring process. We know that it adds to there's a cost to the vacancy that has to be considered. We know that it puts a strain on your other employees. You're going to lose top candidates.
Oh, dude.
The best candidates don't stay available. We know that too. So these are things that have to be considered if you're going to take it seriously. So what else? So we cover all the bases. I mean, that's enough justification. Any one of those things, in my opinion, is justification enough.
Well, it is, especially what you just said as far as losing top candidates, right? The idea that corporate America had 20 years ago that candidates should bow down at the opportunity to interview for this position, that's no longer relevant. Now, especially top talent, they have options. And you know what they don't have? A lot of patience, right? And they're going to go somewhere else. You know who doesn't have options and all the patience in the world? Your D and C level candidates, right?
Correct.
And that's who you're going to be stuck with if your process is too long for comfort.
Well, it comes down to supply and demand.
Yeah.
So if you're willing to settle for subpar candidates, then take as long as you like. But if you want the best available,
federal government,
can't sit on that. And let me tell you, as a third-party recruiter, nothing is more frustrating than when we have the ideal candidate. And you know it when you see it. You just do. Anyone who's been in recruiting for a long time, when you have that just perfect person. You know they're going to get hired if they have an opportunity to interview. They're interested in the job. The timing is right. I mean, the stars are all aligning. And then you have a client on the other side who's slow to pull the trigger and has a delayed process. It is a deal killer. And nothing is more frustrating because you know that this great candidate is not going to sit on the sidelines very long. They're going to have opportunities come their way. So if you're listening and you are someone in a hiring position, don't delay.
That's right.
Act. Don't delay. Act. That's the message.
Now that's the strain on. Well, actually, that's what happens for external candidates. But what happens also is at some point the job has to be done. Right, the vacancy is there, and whatever duties needs to be done in that vacancy, somebody else has to do it. So the longer you take in making sure you fill that role, the more strain you put on your current resources. And guess what happens? That creates burnout. And the more burnout employees have, the bigger job a recruiter is going to have because turnover is just going to go up. If the burnout goes up, turnover goes up.
So let's talk about what you could do about it.
Yes.
So how can you improve your hiring process? There's a number of ways to do it. One is to take advantage of technology that exists. Now, I would tell you, and I say this often, that some of the technology that we use today has made us worse as recruiters collectively, significantly worse, because it makes it too easy. And what I mean by that is you can post a job and have thousands of applicants in a very short time frame. Now that sounds great, but the practicality of that is something altogether different. You don't have the ability to thoroughly look at that many. And I would say that maybe you don't have the ability to look at them at all. So what does that mean? It means that you're going to risk having a lot of unqualified candidates because it's easy for them to apply, right? Easy to get the applicants, easy to apply, very low barrier. People disregard the job description. So we can talk about job descriptions too, but that only matters if people pay attention to it. And what happens is the best candidates, get buried in that giant stack. So that's a challenge, but take advantage of technology, but also understand its limitations.
Correct. So it's especially with AI these days, where I know a lot of recruiters are using AI to assist them in the sourcing process. Now, here's the thing. Notice I said assist, not take over, right? AI is still in its infancy stages, and you still need a human being to really go in and make sure that you're checking for the right things, and you have to make sure that you don't fall into any legal pitfalls, right, that AI just doesn't take a look at. So you have to use technology as a tool to help you source and recruit, not as the tool to source and recruit. There's a big difference there.
Let me put you on the spot as an HR professional.
Talk to me.
How much of an obligation do you believe that recruiters have to address every resume that comes in?
Address every resume that without any kind of AI help?
Just in general. So they've put a job posting out, candidates apply. What obligation do you believe that recruiter has to acknowledge and then address those candidates who've applied?
I think 100%. And here's why. Before a recruiter can say this resume doesn't fit the bill, it's not what I'm looking for, they have to look at it. They cannot say this is not going to work without taking a look at it. Now, how long they spend on it is something different, right? On average, is what, 6 to 9 seconds? A recruiter takes a look at a resume before
Here
they
we are doing math again.
It's Friday. It's payday, right? We got to do math, right? No, but I mean, here's the thing. I think 100%. There's no other way a recruiter can make a determination whether this resume goes to the next step or not without taking a look at it for at least the minimum amount of time or maximum amount of time, which is 9 seconds, to impress that recruiter. What do you think?
I think it's unrealistic because if you run that math out by the number of applications that comes in, that's all they'll spend their time doing is looking at resumes. So what we need, and we're not going to fix this during this recording, someone needs to fix it soon, is a bigger barrier to applying. I saw a post on LinkedIn the other day. I don't support this, by the way. I don't think it's practical in any form or fashion. But they said candidates should have to pay to apply to a job. Now that's silly, but
What?
what I do find interesting is if there was a way to, this is so off topic, and I probably just gonna cut
It
this
wasn't
out.
me. It wasn't me. I promise. It was you, Pete.
But so we know that there's bot traffic everywhere. If you're on Twitter, any social media account, and there's a guy named Michael Saylor. Do you know who Michael Saylor is?
I don't.
He's a CEO of MicroStrategy, a very successful company, and he's a big fan of Bitcoin. And we know that Bitcoin is divisible by 100 million. So basically, you can take the smallest of increments, a fraction of a penny, and have a Bitcoin transaction with it in theory. And his suggestion was you have to have these microtransactions to prove that you're a human. And so what if it was almost like a merit-based system where someone had to do more than just have one click to apply, and where it wasn't that simple. That's what I would like to see, and not to charge anyone, but to have a way that you have to stop and pause and decide whether you really want to apply. Now, LinkedIn has an interesting system for InMails, which you're familiar with, where they give you credits, and you get the credit back. You have a certain number of credits a month. You get the credit back if the person you send the InMail to replies. Now, that to me denotes relevance. If you just send out a lot of spam messages, no one will apply. But if you're contacting people for a relevant purpose, then they will reply at a high rate. Same goes for job applicants. If you only are applying to jobs where you have a realistic chance at getting it, and I'm not saying your experience and background has to match word for word the job description, but it has to be reasonable. That doesn't exist today on LinkedIn. And there's no penalty for saying, yes, I have a degree when you don't. Yes, I'm qualified for this job when you're not. I have X number of years of experience. You're just going to answer with no penalty today. And my contention is that messes up the system for everyone else. And by the way, I'm not alone in thinking that. But there's no barrier. I think we need a barrier, don't you?
I just think it's funny that, I mean, I know it's a meme and I know you don't subscribe to it, but just the rationale of the meme that people should pay to apply. And I mean, I think that's hilarious. If I'm applying for a job, it's because I don't have money.
Absolutely.
I don't have money, Pete.
I agree 100%. But we have to come up with something, right? Yeah. It's not going to be to pay for apply. That's silly. But it used to take effort, right? It used to take writing a letter, sending a resume in the mail, even faxing it. I would argue that even emailing takes effort. One click apply takes no effort at all. And that's the part of the system is broken. So let's move on from that, because that's not speeding up anything, let alone the hiring process.
It's actually along the podcast.
Yeah, we just dragged it out.
All right.
So take advantage of technology, but also understand its limitations. That's my message there. Have a job description that is concise and spells out exactly what you need to the minimum you'll consider. Now, we've just spent 5 unnecessary minutes talking about how people ignore the job description anyway, but I still think it's something you should strive to do. By being as clear as possible. And I like sharing the bad news too, right? Say the worst part of the job. If you know you're going to get flooded with candidates, try to eliminate that as much as possible. I don't know how much it helps in the current market, but you need to spell out the details on the job description to increase your chances of accuracy.
Well, I like that strategy, Pete. And the reason I like that strategy, and you and I have talked about this before, is because, look, what's going to happen if you don't spell that out is you're going to go through the trouble of hiring that person, go through the process, only to find out 6 months later they're not a good fit. You wasted your time, you wasted your money. It's better for you to find out as quickly as possible whether this person is going to be a fit. You've said it on this show plenty of times. Bad news early is good news. So you might as well talk them out of the job. That's why I like that rationale. You talk them out of it. And the people who are still there, they're going to be there for the right reason. So I agree with that 100%. Now, is that streamlining? Or because I don't know if that streamlines the recruiting process. I know it helps you hire somebody who's going to stick around you for the long haul. But does
Well,
that help
I
with this?
hope that my hope, although unrealistic in many respects, is that candidates will see a job description and acknowledge that there's just not a realistic chance that they'll be considered for that role, and will stop applying. So in the not too distant past, just 2 years ago, when the market it was very much an employee's market, you may write a looser job description to try to pull in
Yeah.
a lot of candidates. Now, I'd say go the opposite. Make it as concise as you can.
Yes.
So while you could argue that that doesn't streamline the hiring process if you need to gather a lot of candidates, it does when it comes to matching the quality of candidate with the job that you're hiring for.
No, agreed. So and coming from an HR consultant there, Pete, I see so many times that job descriptions are 10, 15. I saw one that was 30 years old about 2 months ago. And I'm like, this is before email, people. We need to be able. I think there was something in there about a daisy printer. If you don't know what that is, look it up, Google it. So yes, you need to have really clear, really concise, straight to the point job description. Now, here's what that's going to do. It's going to attract the right people, and the people who are looking for a job, but they may not qualify, and they be, oh, I don't know, they're going to jump ship. Right? They're not going to waste your time. They're not going to be in your process, right? They're like, oh, that's too much for me. I'm not going to do it. You're going to have those folks that I'm like, the go-getters, the fake it till you make it kind of people. You got to watch out for them, right? Because you got to make sure that you test them along the way to make sure that they are able to do what they say they're able to do.
And that's what you can figure out through the interview process. So sorry to cut you off, but that so it doesn't matter what they say on paper. That may get them in the door, but then you have to get through that. And I think most candidates are pretty accurate in what they have on the resume. Not all.
You think so? You don't think there's a little bit of liberties in expanding a skill set that happens in a regular resume?
I think it exists. I think it's in a candidate's interest to put themselves in the best possible light, of course. But I think blatant dishonesty on a resume is pretty rare, only because it's going to come out. It's you'd have to be a crazy person to want to get an interview, take your time for the interview, only to know that if you can't code and they're interviewing you as a coder, it's going to not end well. So I think for the most part, candidates are savvy enough to realize what their limitations are. But I would encourage everyone, of course, to put yourself in the best possible light. If you're not going to toot your own horn, no one else will do it for you. No one's going to
do it for you. You're right. And then speaking about interviews from a recruiter perspective, another way that you're able to really streamline that process is to schedule the interviews as frequently as possible. Now, I'm not going to go as far as saying back-to-back interviews, because then there's that delicate dance, right? Because you have to understand the time that it takes for the hiring authority to interview as well. So if you do back-to-back interviews, I mean, if you take a hiring authority's entire day on just interviewing, right? You have to understand the time it takes away from those folks as well. So it's got to be a delicate dance. Schedule interviews consistently, not back to back, but in my opinion, it should be frequent enough that you have a steady flow of candidates to make a decision in a reasonable amount of time.
Well, let's identify the difference in high volume hiring versus hiring for one position. And
Correct.
Maybe that would help explain when it's appropriate and when it's not. So if you are hiring for one position, I believe the recruiter's job is to only send one candidate at a time. Send the hiring manager the person they're going to hire. You won't be able to do that with 100% accuracy, certainly not over time, but that's recruiting when it's done right, in my opinion. Now, that means there has to be a really solid exchange of information up front. The recruiter has to fully understand the hiring need, what the manager's looking for, the culture, all of the hard and soft skills that go involved in making that hiring decision. But you don't have to have a lot of back-to-back interviews if it's done right. You shouldn't. Now, high volume, I would support it fully to say if I need to hire 10 positions, I do want to book that extended period of time for the hiring manager or whoever's going to make the decision to be able to do it rapidly. That, to me, is efficient and speeds up the process.
So that makes sense, right? Because for the time for your exchange, of course, I'm talking about the internal leadership. For your exchange of time for interview, you're going to yield like 10 candidates, right? That you definitely need, especially like in a call center situation or even Amazon, right? Because Amazon, where it's November, it's about to be you know what? Your parents, even your parents pass away, you're not going to take some time off, right? Because
Right.
they are no joke with that. So there has to be a balance, but there's another one here, Pete, that I really want to jump on that I think is crucial. Folks, recruiters, you have to train your interviewers. Make sure your interviewers know exactly what they're looking for. You have to let I'm sorry. Oh, technology. I put a thumbs up and a little emoji came up. What a time to be alive. Sorry, squirrel. No, so you want to make sure that your hiring authorities know exactly who they're looking for. And you got to make sure, especially if you do back-to-back interviews, you got to make sure that interview number one still has the same attention, the same desire, the same energy as interview number 10. Right. So you got to make sure that the interviewers know that. Also, make sure that the interviewers only take notes that has to do with the person's skill set and whether they can or cannot do the job. So appropriate documentation should be in that training. The different types of not discrimination. It's escaping me right now. When you relate to somebody of a specific say, if somebody did answer a question really, really, really well, and then because they answered that question really, really well, the other question they answer wrong is not relevant because you're so high on how well this question.
You're
I
talking
forgot.
about an emotional connection of sorts.
Yeah, yes, yeah. It's something, and it's escaping me right now. I teach this. I can't believe it's escaping me right now. Yeah, so you've got to make sure that you train the people who are interviewing to make sure they know exactly what they're looking for and they avoid any legal pitfalls.
So set clear, objective criteria. I think that's what we're looking
You
for
got
here.
it. You got
You
it.
don't want to add a lot of subjectivity
We ain't
to
have that
that
written
kind
down.
of to the hiring process. You want to be concise, and look, if you should as a company, you should train your interviewers to know how to handle it, what to look for. That's the best route to take. Don't just send people in hoping for the best. That's not a good approach.
And another approach is, and I'm going to look both sides just to make sure people hear me. Clear communication with the candidate. Folks, I'm almost guarantee recruiters that you will dramatically reduce the amount of ghosting that you get from a candidate if you communicate exactly what the candidate can expect from the beginning of the interview all the way to the very end, whether they get the job or not, right? You lay out the map, let them know where they are on that map, let them know where they are on that game board, right? A Monopoly. And the more they know that, the more invested they are, and the less likely they're going to ghost you. They're going to see it through the end.
Can we talk about ghosting just for a second? Because
Yeah.
I feel like that word has morphed into something that I don't believe that it is. If you
Okay.
look on LinkedIn now, candidates are complaining that recruiters are ghosting them because they didn't respond to their job application. I don't think that's ghosting.
No, that's
because
not ghosting.
for a ghost to exist, they had to be alive at some point. So for ghosting in this scenario to exist, there had to be a relationship or a connection at some point. Sending a one-click application does not establish rapport. That does not establish a relationship. And so to consider that ghosting, I think, is an unrealistic expectation, and it really confuses the good reason that word is used is to discourage people from not following up and not communicating once they've been engaged. Because that's really what we're talking about here, is giving candidate feedback in a timely manner. But by sending a one-click application, that doesn't make you a candidate. Maybe in your mind as a person who sends it, but not in the company's mind. Back to the point we talked about earlier, if you're receiving 2,000 applications, you're not building relationships with 2,000 people. It's just not going to happen. And it's an unfortunate aspect of the job search process. It sounds harsh, but it is realistic. And it would apply in any scenario in life. So just because you reach out doesn't obligate the individual to respond.
I agree. Yet and yes, Pete, that is not called ghosting. Actually, there's a scientific term for that. When you apply, when you as a candidate apply and you get no response back. Hold on, let me look it up. The scientific term. Oh, your credentials suck. That's what Google said. Your credentials suck.
Okay, well, maybe. Okay, I know you say that in jest. They're not appropriate for the job.
Yeah,
right. And so look, if Michael Jordan as the best basketball player of all time, yes, I said that. I'm a
I
Jordan
agree with
guy.
you. I agree with you.
If he applies to be a neurosurgeon, his credentials aren't good to be a neurosurgeon. It doesn't take away from his greatness as a basketball player, but I'm not going to let him operate on me. So that's what we're talking about here. And so candidates need to know that when you are eager to find a job and you're on the clock, a lot of people will just take that shot and try to apply. And there's a lot of career coaches out there who are encouraging people to apply to any and every job just to increase their odds. And I'll tell you definitively, it just lowers the odds collectively for everyone of their resume getting pulled out of the pile. So that's a different soapbox. I'll get off that now.
Well, actually, I really think that candidates need to hear this piece. They really do. I know this is higher calling, but this is a piece that candidates need to hear. At the beginning of my career, I used to subscribe to the notion that apply to every job, even if you don't qualify, just so you can get to meet the hiring authority, right? I used to subscribe to that, right? And then shake some hands, make friends with them, and then later on, I'll get something else. When it came my turn to interview, and I found out that's what people were doing, it made me mad. I'm like, you're wasting my time. So I no longer subscribe to that notion. So yes, it don't apply to every single job that's out there. And I get it. If you're out there on unemployment, part of, it depending what state you're in, if you're going to get unemployment, you have to show that you applied. And I get sometimes that's what people do, but try to have an intentional application. Try to have a reason why you're applying, because you have to remember other people are setting their time from the busy schedule aside to make sure they meet with you. So yeah, I changed tune on that about 5 years into my career.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah. So, but communicate with your candidates. Let them know what's going on. That's an important aspect of this. So here, a couple other things let's touch on. Having an employee referral program. That's a great way to speed up your hiring process. No one knows your culture better than your internal employees. Take advantage of them. Give them a reason to refer candidates to you. There's every reason to do it. None that I'm aware of not to. I can't think of a downside to it. So that is something that will not only speed up your process, but increase your retention rates as well, because your employees know who's going to be a good fit. Especially if it's a personal referral, someone they've worked with in the past, they know that person's work habits. Those things are really hard to pick out during an interview process. You can ask questions, you can check references, but I've always said you don't really know what someone's like until you live with them. So go with the person who's lived with that person in the past. Take advantage of what they know that you won't be able to accurately determine in the interview process.
I wasn't saying, so I agree with that 100%. I agree that that employee referrals, if you put a good process in place, it's again, who knows better about the intricacies of the job and the good, the bad, and the ugly than the people who work there. But I had that backfire on me one time. Every organization, every business has that one employee that they're like, oh God, I just wish they would just leave or go somewhere else. And then that one employee about 3 jobs ago gave a referral. I'm like, do we want another one of this person? So that kind of backfired. The person didn't even bother interviewing. But yeah, it's you have walking, living, breathing marketing campaigns in your organization. Leverage that. Trust me, folks, you will get much better candidates from people who were referred from other people who know the ins and outs of that job. So that is a great way to make sure you got the right talent for the job. There's an HR piece, but that's a whole nother show to be careful with. But I don't want to derail us, right?
So. We do that enough as is.
Yeah.
I'm definitely going to cut out the Bitcoin part earlier.
Oh, come on, leave it in there.
that was 5 minutes of unnecessary conversation. But we, of course, have to bring up the value of hiring a third party. Hire a recruiting firm to speed up your hiring process. Why? Because that's all we do. We have blinders on. We are not a corporate talent acquisition department that inevitably gets pulled into other things. A staffing company, a recruiting firm, a headhunter, use whatever words you like. Third parties are on a mission because they don't get paid, they don't eat unless they deliver. Now, what better motivation for a fast and efficient hiring process is to leverage someone who only gets rewarded when they produce results? And we're measured on a different timeline internally. When we talk about the average of 30, 40, maybe even 50 days for a hiring process, my eyes glaze over. That sounds unrealistic to me, because I'll go out of business if it takes that long to find a great candidate. So we're incented and highly motivated to produce not just a candidate or candidates, but the right candidate as fast as possible.
So for every recruiter out there listening, especially recruiters in corporate America, please understand, yes, it's a great idea to go with a third-party recruiter agency. That way, because they're the experts, but they work fast. They work really, really fast. So they're
Be careful what you wish for. Is that what you're saying?
Well, no, because what happens is, some organizations are not used to how quick these organizations work, and then they bring all these great candidates and they take their time in selecting. But the clock is ticking for that candidate, right? If they're a top tier candidate, I guarantee that's 5 other offers on their table. 5 other offers, and if you drag your feet in making a selection, your competitor's going to take them. So bring in a third-party staffing firm, but also understand that they work really fast, and whatever they put in front of you, go ahead, take the time, make the effort to make sure you do what you need to do to make sure you don't lose that candidate due to time.
So if I'm describing opposite ends of the spectrum as when you should and shouldn't use a third party for hiring, you don't need one if time is not important. Now, time always should be a factor. If it's not an immediate opening, don't use a third party for that. Don't waste a staffing company's time. Or if you're flooded with so many great candidates, you don't need to use a third party, then of course don't do it. I like to say that no one uses us unless they need us. But if you do need a third party, if urgency is a factor, if it is a role that needs to be filled as quickly as possible, then they're your best friend. Yep. A third-party staffing company is your best friend because we are inherently going to be much faster and more efficient than a corporate entity. And that's just the way it is. And I would argue that anytime, anywhere.
I agree. No, I agree with you. I agree with you, because remember, a recruiter for a corporate entity, they're just somebody that works for a business that has a different core business. A staffing agency, that's their core. That's what they do for a living, right?
It's a great way to look at it. It's not about the quality of the individual. It's not about the capabilities of the individual recruiter. It has to do with what the core business actually is. And everything in that business, if you're a third party, is focused on recruiting and staffing. Everything. That's it. Sales is focused on recruiting, right? Operations is focused on recruiting, every aspect of it. But if you're any other type of business, the core of what you do is not recruiting. So that's a great thing to bring up. And I don't know that I've ever actually thought of it that way before, but it makes so much sense.
Well, yeah, because it's if you're in the business of making toilet paper and it's time to cut a staff, you're not going to cut the people who make the toilet paper. That's what you need to actually succeed. They're going to cut out people who don't make a direct impact, right? Which sometimes it's HR, training, recruiting. Whereas in a staffing agency, when we have to let people go because things are tough, you're going to keep your top players, and you may let go of some people who don't make a direct impact. So yeah, it really depends on that issue. That's why it's a good idea. If you don't have the time to actually do it yourself, get a staffing agency who's an expert in that field. And man, let me tell you, they work quick.
Well, it's a difference between a thing you do and the thing
you do. That's right.
That's it.
Right.
Okay, so to wrap up, we want to simplify the onboarding process, of course, in this. That goes without saying. But if you've listened this far, what we've covered are the ways that you can speed up your hiring process. There's lots of reasons to do it. No reason not to. Ricky, did we cover everything? Did we
I
do
think
it?
don't say it. No,
Won't say
no,
it.
wait. No, I'm sorry because I know you're wrapping up, but I have to say this because I'm big on onboarding, Pete. I am huge on onboarding. Yes, streamline it. Yes, make it as efficient as possible, but do not let the impact diminish. Do not let the impact diminish at all because I know somebody who just started a job 2 weeks ago, and that person was in an office all day long watching a video for new employee orientation. It was, efficient as all can get. But let me tell you, by the third hour in that 8-hour day, looking into that camera, this person's eyes were glazed over. So, yes, streamline it as much as you can, but don't let the human connection be affected by that streamlined process because that still is key. I just
Perfect.
had
I
to
love
say
it.
that. I'm sorry.
So, in conclusion, how to speed up your hiring process.
Yep.
Clear job descriptions, take advantage of technology, employee referral programs, great way to do it. Set clear expectations internally, teach your interviewers how to manage the process. And when you need to, hire a third-party recruiting firm. They'll be your best friend if speed and efficiency are at the top of your priority list. Anything else?
Pete, look at how far we've come. We're now summarizing the end of the podcast.
I know.
We're doing
trying.
really good. I'm proud of ourselves. And
Well,
I did
there's no one left listening this long, so why not?
Mom, love you. She's listening.
That's it.
I know she is. Yeah, she's so proud of me.
I'm proud of you too. So Ricky, thank you. Thanks for listening. If you are with us, our two moms, wonderful. We appreciate you, and have a great weekend.
Have a good one, guys. Bye, Mom.